Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. Today we have the always amazing Tom Field. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me back.
Good. I am so excited to have you back. We always have fantastic conversations. For those of you guys that have watched previous episodes, you will know Tom. If you're new, Tom is professor at University of Nebraska-Lincoln and director of the Angler Entrepreneurship Program. So we have an interesting topic today, and it is regret. So you in the audience, you're going to be watching this and you'll go, Tracy, reminder, your farm business. And I'm going to say in any business, any context, regret is probably very, very, very applicable. So I'm excited for this conversation. Tom, before we start, do you want to tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
You bet. So my story is a twisted path of not being particularly focused for most of my life. So I started out as a ranch kid in Western Colorado. I still own a part of that business. Went off to university, went back home, worked for my family. I've worked in a lot of different venues and environments, and then got the opportunity to come start an entrepreneurship program at the University of Nebraska. We've been at that for just a little over 10 years. It's been a wonderful experience, and I'm excited to let you know that our 10-year impact report, which we just completed in the last couple of months, without all of our alumni companies reporting, because they're good Nebraskans, they don't always want to share their financials with someone. But in the 10 years that we've been in the game, our companies have produced $147 million in gross revenue, created about 123 jobs in the state and region. And those things are really important, and we're excited about those. But more importantly, what we've done is we've figured out a way, excuse me, to unleash this amazing creativity that actually sits inside of people. And the notion that you don't have to just go the safe path, that there is a pathway to agency, to creating the future that you want to be part of, pride of ownership, building the thing you care about through entrepreneurship. And we do it with a very purpose-driven approach. And thus, that experience, we've also encountered lots and lots of people who bring their children to university, or encounter us out in the business world, and they say, if only. And their regret, what's really interesting, the regret is almost always, I wish I would have started a business. Mm. Right. And so when Dan Pink's book, The Power of Regret, came out, I thought, wow, that's interesting. He's actually studying this in depth. And it's an amazingly powerful tool that, as a kid, I tried to avoid because it's uncomfortable to regret something. But now I'm learning that actually regret's very instructive.
Yeah. I want to jump in here. I hope I'm not cutting you off, but
No, please do.
Hey, I said my age on the show once already. I turned 40 last May, so I'm turning 41. And I've never got fancy, concerned. I've never had those crises at 30. And I'm pretty level-headed, right? Factual. It's like, okay, you're just a day older than you were before, right? So like, let's not get silly about this. But something about 40 hit me like smack. And then all of a sudden, and I mean, I love my life. I have built my dream life, truly, and I don't say that to brag, but all of a sudden, this regret and this time and then this looking your life right in the face just hit me. And I know 40 is young. So when you brought this topic up, I'm like, yes, let's do it, because it's so relevant to life and to farming. So sorry, I had to jump in there.
No, I'm glad you did. And just so you know, 40 is the new 25.
I was saying 40 is the new 30, and I feel like it, but something about that. And, you know, just like you said, that regret is useful and important. I went through that period where I looked at everything. I'm like, you know what? People always say midlife crisis and oh my gosh, I've gone off the deep end. But I think regret and these moments in our life that just hit us, they're important opportunities to look at our life, right? So I think that's probably just going to set you right up for what you want to say. What can we learn from regret?
Yeah, that is really insightful. And it's we hit these benchmarks, whether they're fabricated by a number, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever it is. The first child is born, or the last child leaves the house, or the first job, whatever it is, right? There are these things that we that do cause us to reflect. And typically what happens, I think, is we have this unhealthy, maybe a little bit of an unhealthy relationship with regret, in that, oh, I don't want to address regret because, well, one, it oftentimes there's a little sense of either loss or pain or hurt, and we have to confront that. And yet, when we do that, there's just real value. So, I'm gonna rely a lot on Dan Pink's book, The Power of Regret. I've never met him, so I'm helping him out without ever meeting him. But it is, if you like listening to a book, he's really good on Audible. But it's worth the read. And the subtitle is How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. And in agriculture and family business, that capacity is really, really important. And what regret does is regret allows us, as Pink puts it, to tap into two superpowers that we humans have. And the first one is that we can teleport into the future and into the past in our mind, right? We can go back and experience moments both of celebration and achievement, but also moments of loss and mistakes and regret. And we can also jump ahead and think about how things might be in the future, right? We can also, the second superpower is to take and tell a story about something that never happened, right? And the way we do that is, what if I would have chosen differently?
Mm.
Right. And we can then play that out. Here's just a silly example, right? If I hadn't given up the drums, right? And I was a trap drummer in high school, and I played in a really, really good high school band on a lot of different levels. And then we had, my friends and I had a band that was terrible. But I can imagine, if I hadn't given up drumming today, I'd be touring the world with Bono. Right? Not that wasn't going to happen, but the point is we can juxtapose things. And so, if I had chosen a different seed variety, the harvest would have been different. If I had done X, this would be different. But the ability to transport ourselves backward and forward is really powerful. So let's just think backward for a second. And I share this one with my young entrepreneurs, is like, so we can learn from regret, but regret almost always asks us to go back and experience something that was painful. And so one of the examples I will often use with them is when I was a young guy out of college and back home with the family business, and I had started a second division of the seed stock company, and so we brought in Angus cattle for the first time in history in our family, and I had this business going, and about the third or fourth year, it was crunch time, and we were getting ready to send some cull cows out, and I had one cow out of the purebred Angus group that needed to go. because she was open. And the guys came, they said, which one to get? And I, instead of opening my book and looking, I gave them the number from memory and I transposed two of the digits.
Oh no.
And they sent a really good cow off ranch, and the open cow stayed.
Oh.
Right? That is a moment of regret.
Yeah.
Right? It was a foundational regret. I didn't pay attention to the details. As a result, there was an economic cost. And it was, when I realized what I had done, that was like painful. I can teleport back to that and go, I felt awful. I felt awful because I had high hopes for that particular beef cow. I had regrets financially, and I also had regrets that in front of our crew, I had made a really stupid mistake that could have been prevented. But you know what? I've never made that mistake again.
I
Right.
feel
So
that, Tom.
regret,
I feel that regret for you. I do.
and right. And,
Yeah.
you know, I didn't really realize it until about 2 hours later. Otherwise I would have run down the road chasing the truck, come back. Right. But you know, the dog was down the road too far. So anyway, that regret can help us, and it helps us learn some things about who we are and about our decision-making process. And it's useful because it's a lot easier to learn from things that are hard, I think, than from those things that just went smoothly.
Yeah.
And if we protect ourselves from that, which is a little bit uncomfortable, we miss some of the real opportunities.
Tom, and why I want to have this conversation, I guess maybe call it my Tracy's midlife crisis, 40-year-old crisis, but it's hot on my mind. But not only that, being a farmer, being a business owner, I think this is so relevant. And you look at how much stress is on farmers all the time. And there's so many variables out of our control, so many unknowns, things are fluctuating all the time. And I watch people I know that have farmed, I watch us. And the fact that we're wearing so many hats, making so many decisions in an environment that we really have no control, I see this mental burden. And maybe I can say I even feel it. As time goes on, there's just such a weight as a business owner. And for example, some businesses, and no business is easy, but you have a set price, you know your customers, everything's pretty steady. Nothing's ever in your control, but in farming, it's so unique. And maybe where I wanted to have this conversation is there's a lot of weight that can be put on our shoulders year after year after year. And then all of a sudden, 10, 20, 30 years, that weight is on our shoulders. And you think of every time you made a regret, a choice, you made the best decision with the information you knew at the time, but it turns out wrong because the markets fell, the markets went up, da, 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 da. But I could see it, and maybe it happens a bit with us and the farmers I know. I could just see the mental burden. And then because you're so tired of making so many decisions, I almost feel like this regret can become a ball and chain for farmers. Like it just compiles. I don't know. I don't know if that resonates to you, but that's really why I wanted to have this conversation, because farming is unique in that. And I don't think we give ourselves grace and forgiveness for trying to make the best mistakes that turned out wrong. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation.
Yeah, that right on the money. And and what I want to do is let's talk a little bit about sort of the 4 categories of regret that sort of sit out there. But then let's come back to that, because then how do you handle regret? And there is this really powerful model about how you turn regret into benefit. and lots and actually really good social science that backs a lot of this up. We've all seen the tattoo, right? That somebody puts on their arm or somewhere that says no regrets. The really funny one, of course, is the no regrets tattoo right here with regrets misspelled, which is sort of like a funny kind of thing. Like, wow, you really no regrets? And where did all this begin? So there was a song composed in France back in I think the late 40s, early 50s, and Edith Piaf, who was this famous singer, took it on and made it famous. And the core lyric of it is no, nothing at all. No, I regret nothing at all. I care nothing about the past. Right? And it was a smashing success, sold 1 million copies almost overnight. Uh, Unbelievable acclaim in the music world for her. And that song has been used since then to advertise cars and candy bars and insurance companies. And it's sort of credited as this cultural norm, this unexamined thought that yes, a perfect life is one without regrets until you stop and examine life. It's nonsense, right? Even Edith Piaf, as Pink so beautifully describes, and tragically, had a life filled with pain and challenge, addicted to alcohol and morphine, a broken marriage, a dead lover, a second husband who was left deeply in debt. And 3 years after she records the song, she's dead from liver failure.
Wow.
No regrets. And not to speak badly of the deceased, but it just doesn't make any sense, right? And so Pink said, look, let's take a hard look at this and let's figure out, is regret, because it is painful, is it something that we just we can't gain anything from, or is there something baked into us that regret's actually helpful to us? And he went in and studied it and asked a lot of people, started out with a North American survey, asked all kinds of people to respond in this survey about their regrets. Then it went international, and he, I think by the time he's done, like 50 some countries all over the world. And what's really interesting is that regret falls into sort of 4 basic buckets. Bucket 1 is foundational, and those are regrets like, I wish I would have learned to manage my money, right? Or I wish I hadn't started smoking, or I wish I would have kept exercising, or I wish I would have developed better sleep habits, right? Those sort of foundational things. The second is regrets about boldness. And this is the one that which gets really interesting is that the biggest regret relative to boldness and the second biggest regret overall are regrets about not starting a business.
Huh. I believe that.
Right?
Yep.
And which is really interesting. And then of course boldness around, things like maybe taking a business risk or taking on an opportunity, or all those kind of things would be just from a place of choosing safety over something with recognizable but maybe acceptable levels of risk to move forward. The third one are moral regrets that aren't necessarily earth shattering, but people who remember, for example, lots of people remember as small children, stealing a piece of candy from the local store, and they're 80 years old and it still bothers them, right? They've never stole anything since then, right? That informed them. My one of my, and it's a little one, but it still bothers me. I was probably 14 years old and we were at a 4-H meeting, and one of the kids sitting in front of me went to sit down in his chair, and for reasons I do not know, I just reached up and pulled the chair back so he kind of fell backwards. Right? He didn't get hurt, but it was embarrassing for him. And as soon as I did it, I'm like, I instantly regretted that decision. Like it was instant, and I felt terrible. And there was no, like, I couldn't undo, like I could not back the tape up and undo it. So I could apologize and try to make good. And, you know, and we were able to maintain the friendship through life. But I still remember that, right? And that was a moral failure. It wasn't on the level of, you know, treason, but it was a moral failure. And then the fourth one are regrets about connection, right? And you know, and those regrets are rarely about combative kinds of relationships, but just relationships where people drift apart for whatever reason, time and distance and life, but they get caught in, I'm not going to reconnect because I'm embarrassed that I let the relationship sort of drift.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, and so in family business, there's a big one. In family business, boldness. In family business, foundations, right? No one's coming back to the farm or coming back to the business from my kids because they hate work and I didn't help them develop a foundation. So now as the senior generation, I look back and I have regrets that I didn't guide them better. And someday those same children will have regrets that they didn't learn better. Right. And so all of that swirls around in the space of regret. And the good news about it is that we can examine those things we regret. And we have two choices. We can, one, wallow in it, which is not healthy and not useful, right? Is to just be captured by our regrets and then be unhappy forever. Or we can take those regrets and we can learn from them. And the process is really one of saying, okay, I have this regret. Step one, disclose it. Tell somebody, right? And sit down and with someone and say, look, will you mind hearing me? I have this regret I want to talk about, right? So, right, I just disclosed with you earlier, right? The Angus cow mistake, right? That's a regret. And so you disclose it. And then rather than practice self judgment or hitting your, I'll just beat myself up and I'll wallow in this. Instead, you practice what's called self-compassion, which is really the question of saying, if someone had just disclosed that to me, what would I have said to them?
Yeah.
Right? Does that not instantly? Yeah. Oh, that changes things.
I felt that like right here, right there. Yeah. Just, oh, right. Yeah, totally.
And all of a sudden now and it's not that we're deluding ourselves. We're not ignoring what happened. We're not trying to cover it up, right? Put a blanket over it. It's not there. We're just recognizing that we can put it in context, because how would others put it in context? And, often I think we're just so concerned that somebody's going to, in farming. Okay. So I set the seeder or the planter or whatever on the wrong setting. Yeah. Now, of course, that would never happen, except at our place. And you can it's a mistake and it's a regret, but you can learn from it, and everybody can grow from it if they know about it. But if you don't disclose it and then you just every time you look at that field for the rest of that growing season, you just, are frustrated and you beat yourself up. Well, that's not going to be at all productive, right? And then the third piece of that is after you kind of said, okay, I've disclosed it. I'm gonna put it in context, and then I'm gonna make a decision. I can either go fix it. If it's something I did, I can attempt to fix it. I can repair it. I can apologize for it. I can ask forgiveness and then let it go. Or if it's something I didn't do, I can make a mental note, play out that special capacity to say, if I had chosen differently, this is what would have happened, and then put that into the decision-making process in the future that says, okay, the next time something like that comes along, I'm going to take the bold option, because the inaction is what we regret the most. Now, certainly there are actions that people regret, and in the moral space, bullying people, or one that comes up in his is cheating on a spouse or something like that. Those are that's a whole nother level of regret that's got to be dealt with in a very, very unique, probably sort of way. But when we stop and say, okay, I didn't start that business, or I didn't buy into that investment group, or I didn't hedge the cattle, or I didn't take the time to learn how to manage that piece of the puzzle. Yeah, it's a regret and there was a cost, but we can turn that cost into an investment if it informs us better in the future, where, like from that moment on, when I was getting cull cows in the inventory, let me tell you, we are much more precise in our inventory management than we once were. We look at the book, we have spreadsheets, we have hard copy, virtual copy, we store it in the cloud. If we could store it on the side of the barn, we would store it on the side of the barn, because I just don't want to make that mistake again. Right? It doesn't mean we're not mistake free, because we still make plenty of mistakes, but we learned from it and we built a system to try to avoid that in the future. So anyway, that's a long kind of grouping summary. So I'd love to explore which pieces of that you think would be of most value to your audience. But the key is you can turn this into value, and that's the important thing.
I have one for you, and I think this is big. Not I think this is big. I know this is big. And I just seen a thread on Twitter, of all things, about this. So very timely. It was just the other day. So farm men, farm women, whoever, put yourself in the shoes. But it was a gentleman that says he is having a hard time balancing family with the needs of the farm. And I mean, we're self-employed. I see it. We don't have children, but I could imagine the pressure Anthony would feel. I know how every man that's working feels, right? Because the mom, we're going to get into gender roles here, but let's put it that way. The mom's probably taking care of the kids and farming if she is. I don't want no hate mail after. Let's just go according to this tweet. But all the men chimed in and they're like, same thing. I hear you, bud. We're working hard on the farm. It needs to get done in a period. But I feel like I have massive regrets about not spending enough time with my family. So that's one, I think, to me, I see two buckets for the farmers. I see regretting the mistakes made, selling the wrong thing, the wrong time, not
Right.
selling, right? not expanding. There's a lot of those. So I could say that's one big bucket, but I see the second bucket, I regret spending so much time on the farm and we didn't do these things. And the kids are grown up and now they don't care, whatever the story is.
Yeah. So, in that space, one of the things that you can do, and I think that is one, it's super self awareness, and it is, and that struggle that he's having is not unique. I mean, it's pervasive, and I would suspect in two income families that both parents are probably struggling with that. You know, my wife just took on a role as um, the executive VP for Nebraska Cattlemen, and so she's now in this like very hectic career space as she's, you know, starting up in a new position with a lot of responsibility. And our 10-year-old twins are sort of like, wait a minute, where did everybody go?
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of like, you know, regret in that. And what I've learned from that, and and watching lots of family businesses that I work with and lots of young entrepreneurs who also get really caught up in the business, and a lot of other stuff just sort of floats into the back, is you ask yourself the question, is there a way for me? So when we try to balance just drives me crazy, because balancing is like being on the tightrope with that big bar, right? You're just trying to not fall off. And I don't like that feeling. I probably, because I'm not athletic enough to be comfortable on the balance beam, right? Or on that tightrope. But if somebody tell me you've got to balance or juggle, you know, keep all the, wait a minute, time out. Like like, I don't even know how to do that, because in that space, it becomes if something wins, something has to lose. And I don't know how to do that. So what I've been learning, and I had somebody tell me this about a year ago, is instead of trying to balance work and life, why don't you try to blend work and life?
Nice. Yeah.
And so what does that look like? And I think each person will think about that differently, but it might be just setting the new, you know, you're thinking about foundations and you're thinking about connections. So those would be the two areas of regret. So, okay, I'm going to make room for this, and I'm going to recognize the seasonality of my life, but there are going to be things that will be absolutes. These are the I'm going to make a covenant with these things, these activities, these periods of time with my kids, right? And if that means that I'm going to get off the combine at 8:30, drive to the house, walk in the house, pull the boots off so I don't track across the floor, walk into my 7-year-old's bedroom, sit down, pick up Hank the cow dog and read him 2 chapters, then I'm going to do that. Or I'm going to call my wife, or if I've got a sitter there, whatever, hey, put the phone up next to Kate and Coleman's ear. I'm going to tell them a story before they go to sleep. I'm on the combine, but I'm going to tell them a story. We are now connected, and I can say to them, you know, I wish you were out here with me on the combine, but it's really great. It's beautiful. And let me tell you a story about it. You make up your story and you tell them how much you love them. And that's that, right? And it wasn't perfect, but you took action. You fixed, which men love. We love to fix stuff. You at least set the stage for an improvement there, right? You know, and I think that's what regret does for us, is we feel that twinge, and so we have the choice. We can either like bury it and go, oh, this is just going to get heavier and heavier, or I can do these incremental things that might change the game, right? And I'm gonna what would I so a guy, like, what would I say to another farmer? So I could beat myself up, or what would I, if my best friend said it to me, what would I say to him? And I'd say, well, number one, you're a good husband and a good dad.
Yep.
And you are working your tail off. And you know what? To be successful, it requires work. And everybody in the family needs to understand that. That is, like, there are seasons. And there are seasons it's hard. And that means we'll have to pull together. But have you thought about how you could handle Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, or in the season when you're super busy? How much does it really hurt if you step off the machine and you have snacks in the field with your kids, or you play a game of tag or whatever for 10 minutes? It's going to be better for you up here anyway. And have you thought about that? And over time, what a little community would do, I think, of friends would say, okay, hey, there are some ways to reframe this. There are ways to figure this out. And then, because and that's the power of disclosure, right? Had that guy not disclosed, man, this is really bothering me. But by disclosing, nobody said, oh, yeah, boy, shame on you. They all said, oh, man, I get it.
Yeah.
Wow, that alone is powerful. And then the second one is, I'm sure there's like now some things flying amongst each other. Have you thought about, have you tried, what if, etc. And then, you're sort of building a solution together. And instead of regret compounding, and you just get deeper and deeper in regret, you've disclosed it. People are practicing compassion with themselves and each other, and they're reframing it into, here's how we could get to a better outcome. It may not be the perfect outcome. You're never going to get there anyway, but you at least made strides. That changes the game, right? No longer is it regret. Now it's, I took action.
I love it. Can I toss something in here?
You bet. Absolutely.
With my little dance with regret, that was quite the little journey. A little bit of soul searching. And then you go, okay, well, I regret doing this. I'm like, no. Okay, if you didn't do this, it wouldn't have led to this, and this led to this, and you're happy in where you're at. Okay, but I should have did this. And then you work yourself down the path. And then somewhere I came to two pieces. And I know you're going to go into how regret motivates and diminishes us. I know you touched a little bit. You might want to go there a little bit more. But my two pieces that I realized is our brain has a negative bias, right? Like, okay, the one thing, like you said, the one thing you did wrong in your life, maybe you did too, but the one little weird thing that we each did that haunts us forever, OMG, why are we even thinking about that? Have we not done a million good things since? Isn't that weird that the brain focuses there? And then,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, keep going, because you're on to something good.
Yeah. And that's why I want to have this conversation, because that tweet with the farmers about, I regret doing this. Okay, but you're not looking at the full picture. We're like focusing on the negative. And then my second part, I come to realize that I think at each moment, in each decision we make, we're making the best decision for that moment with the knowledge we have, the tools we have, the money we have, the time we have. And if we could have done better, we would have done better. And then I've been working this through myself a lot, so this is a hot subject for me. And then I go, well, Tracy, you knew better. Why didn't you do this and this and this in your business and you'd be further ahead? I'm like, okay, well, I was overwhelmed. There was too many things on the go, but you knew. I'm like, well, maybe Tracy, just give yourself a little bit of grace, because even if you knew better, you were too tired or too overwhelmed. So therefore you couldn't do
Yeah.
better.
Yep.
I couldn't. Otherwise I would have done better. Right. So anyways, this has been an interesting, it didn't quite take me a year to dance through this stuff. My birthday's in May, I'd say a good 6 months of gut punches and walking through. And I mean, yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring this conversation, because for farmers and farm families, there's so many of these little gut punches. Why didn't I? Why didn't I? Why did I? Why did I? Right?
Yep.
Sorry, take it away. I'm
No,
off the subject here.
and you're so right. I mean, we get captured by this. We get captured by that which went wrong,
Yeah.
right? And it can be informative, so long as we also recognize that there's no perfect choices. Regret is part of the human equation, right? And it is part of the experience. And so one of the things that I would lay out is that in decision making, if we're worried about, like, am I going to regret this? We ask ourselves, the first question is, is this or will I regret it because it's a failure of foundation? Will I regret it because I'm going to regret this because it's a boldness regret? Am I making a moral choice that I'm going to regret later? Right. And is it, is this a connection? Am I going to lose a connection here, or damage a connection? And if none of those things are outcomes, if we look at our decision, we say, well, no, this is not an issue around foundation, boldness, morals and values, or connection, then we make the best decision we can make in the moment, and we go for it. And that's it, right? If it's potentially going to impact either of these other four categories, and all of a sudden I'm going to have a foundational regret, then maybe I ought to stop, think about the decision a little more, maybe get a little more information, and put a little more energy into it. And the reality is, most of our choices are by and large ones that you learn a little something from and you go forward, right? And mistakes kind of fit in three categories. Oops, right? And oops is an oops. And let it go, right? Just, let it go. The second one is, maybe a failure that really falls in the category of just a missed opportunity, right? We can learn something from it. We missed an appointment. We're like, okay, I can reset my notifications on my phone or whatever and make sure that I don't miss that appointment in the future. And it doesn't happen very often, but I've learned a little something, and I can actually make a change and probably prevent it from happening again, because it was a mistake and it maybe had a cost. And then there's the things where we're like, okay, is this a mistake that happens over and over again that is creating damage, right? That's devaluing my work, my relationships, my brand, whatever. And that might be, if I'm, as a young guy, I had a not horribly volatile, but I had a temper, right? And I had troubles learning how to control my temper when the pressure got on, right? Someday there's going to be archaeologists wandering around our ranch going, why is this hammer laying here?
I was gonna say you had to be working cattle when it happened, right?
Right? Yeah. Well, yeah. And why is that there? Well, and that's when then we say, okay, now I need to do a remake of that thing. I've got to get control of that. And then that's an area of focus. But if we think every mistake we make is an area of focus, that is not good mental health, right? And as it turns out, right, the we have a tendency to get caught in the little mistakes that really don't, in the big picture, don't matter. So I think you're right about this whole notion of giving oneself a little bit of grace, because there's a lot going on and a lot to be done, and you know there's going to be oops moments, and we just have to accept the oopses and make corrections on the mistakes that where we really learn something. And then if it's a recurring thing, then we seek a way to get a control of that. And that oftentimes means asking other people to help us.
Yeah, it's interesting. And sorry if I jump in here and there one too many times, but it's just, I feel this is a great conversation myself. It's timely for our audience. And when that tweet came up just the other week, I'm like, gentlemen, and you're right, ladies. And I was just kind of going off that tweet, but ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah.
goodness gracious, give yourself some grace. It's seasonal. We need two incomes to make families operate. You're doing the best you can so your kids have an amazing life. Don't rake yourself over the coals. But it's hard to see that, right? When it's yourself. And you're obviously took a path. Isn't it natural to look at the opposite and go, oh, shoot, I should have, right?
Right.
I
Well,
think, yeah,
and
crazy.
even like I think back, and I remember as a kid, and my dad was one of those guys that went, if he could have gone 24/7, he probably would have. He was just that kind of worker, and my mom was a work ethic. I mean, that was the core. That was one of the core values in our family. And I can remember as a kid having a little bit of like, oh, here we go again, and I'm going to be stuck, um, standing around waiting for my dad, or he's going to give me the most, mundane of all the jobs, and I'm going to have to do that for a long period of time, and all the things that kids complain about. But I look back now, right, and I am so thankful that I had to work. I am so thankful. Now, I'm also thankful I've got it in context maybe a little better than he did, but I'm thankful for that. And I think about kids today, the reason our program works, the reason we can produce 22 and 23-year-old founders who go out and create these $1 million companies, is because they're not fragile. They've had to deal with some hardship. And I think, and I don't know about Canada, but I can guarantee you in the United States, we've produced a generation where about 25 or 30% of them are so fragile that if the wind blows, they're ruffled and they're offended. Well, this is a problem. And so as we're raising kids and trying to give them our time and our attention, I'm a big fan of, we also want to grow autonomous, self-determined, self-motivated young people. And as a parent, if I cater to their every whim and need, and my wife would tell you, well, he kind of does that because he's a big softie. But we've got to come to realization that it's okay for kids to have to fend for themselves a little bit. How are they going to learn? And how do we learn? We make mistakes. Like, nothing I ever did right the first time was a particularly epiphany moment, or did I learn a lot from. But you learn something and you make a little mistake and you learn from that and you get a little better at it. Then you make a different kind of mistake and you get a little bit better at it. And sooner or later, after, whatever it is, the saying is the 10,000 hours of work, you get pretty good at it. And at that point in time, you can take, Molly Tuttle, the bluegrass singer's song, Good Enough, and say to yourself, it's good enough. I don't have to open every door. I opened the door I wanted to. It's good enough.
Yeah, that's powerful. This is a big conversation and I'm just feeling it too. Cause like I said, I'm going through it and I can think of different conversations I've had with family members about the same thing. And it's funny, we're always a little in our brains because it's our world. And I'm thinking, and I won't disclose it because it's a private family member's conversation, but they say, I regret doing this because I wasn't home enough. I'm like, well, I didn't see it that way. And
Right.
right. And then they're like, oh, and then you give them a little context and they're like, oh, okay. So it's interesting. And, when you gave me the list of things we could talk about, I'm like, that one, because I think every farmer needs to hear this. Because, let's pretend that those exact same gentlemen and ladies that seen that tweet are watching this. So you work too hard. You got to get it done. You're setting, like you said, you're setting a great example for the kids. You're getting it in the bin. You're making the money. You're showing a good example for your children. You know what? Though, wow, that's good, right?
Yeah, and with and in every attempt we can, with safety in mind, of course, but involving kids in the work.
Yeah.
Like that, a couple of the first really successful old school entrepreneurs that I met, Hollybeck Studios, which did all the design work for Harley Davidson's gear. This was a company formed by a young farm kid from Nebraska, right, and became a force became an absolute force in New York in the marketing world. And early on, what they did is they started the company. They were airbrushing T-shirts, right? Because that's like that in the early days of putting something on a shirt, which nobody thought about prior to about 1940 or 1950. They just airbrushed it on. And he told me, he said, Terry and I, his wife, when we go around all these state fairs, I said, well, what'd you do with the kids? He says, they slept on the piles of shirts at our booth at the state fair. That's how we raised them. They were immersed in the whole thing.
Yeah.
And he said, it was a beautiful way to go through life together. And so I think about that a lot too, like that it's okay to bring kids into the midst of the circus, right, and let them be in that. And the other thing I would say too that I think is so important, and this is something that's relatively new, but don't read any judgment on social media. I mean, like, if somebody's like, what do you mean you're working 8 or 10 hours a day? Hey, I don't need judgment, right? You want to support, offer suggestions for how to blend, fine. So one thing I think we have to do is make sure that the metrics we're following are ones that we really believe, and not just getting caught up in what the influencers think we should be doing. And I think social media can be a force for real good because it keeps us connected and we can share some ideas, things. But what I would say to people is like, pick your friends, pick a good group, have a nice little group, and then all the rest of the world just arms length them.
Put the blinders on. I say, like the horses in a thoroughbred race, run your race. Okay.
Yeah, run your race.
3 final points, and I think we've sprinkled and spoke about them throughout. You can touch on them. How does regret motivate us? How does it diminish us? And how can organizations grow from acknowledging regret? You kind of touched on all of them.
Bet.
Do you want to wrap up any more points there?
Yeah, let me be concise on each of those.
Okay.
So how does regret diminish us? When we just choose to wallow in it.
Mm.
And when we stay in the regret instead of saying, okay, I've acknowledged it, I learned something from it, here's my course of action, I'm going to let it go. So if we wallow in it, that's a mistake. That diminishes us. Overemphasis on regret, massive mistake, right? So self-regulate against that. How does regret motivate us? It reminds us of really important things that we're going to do differently in the future. Fast story. 3 years ago, I was on a big mountain with my oldest sons and their then girlfriends, now all wives. And we were up on this big snow face on this at this mountain lake, real high, very remote. And it was I don't know, it was probably a 20-foot jump off that thing. Well, one of my sons, who's a real mountaineer and outdoorsman guy, he and his then girlfriend, they said, we're jumping. So they jumped in, right? And we knew it was safe. We tested depth and all that. And I'm thinking, I'm going to do this. But I'm like, it's also cold up here and I don't want to wear wet clothes the whole day. So my brain went, oh, you're going to have to get down to your skivvies in front of your son's girlfriends. they might have to be in therapy for years. And I didn't jump. I didn't do it.
Fair.
We weren't 10 yards back down the trail and I'm starting to regret it. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So that night I said to him, I said, now look, I said, we're coming back someday when you all have recognized that I'm just a dude, and come if you want, you don't have to, but I'm going back up there and I'm jumping off that thing at some stage. That's on my bucket list.
Nice.
So how did it motivate? Last year we were at a theme park on a little family vacation down in Missouri. And my 10-year-old daughter, there's this fantastic roller coaster, and she's working on her boldness, and she's like, works up courage. She says, Dad, I want to go on that. Okay, let's go. So we get up there and we get close to the front. Now we're right there, about ready to get on. And she's like, I'm not so sure. Oh. And immediately I said to her, I said, Kate, you remember my story about when I feel so bad about not jumping off that ice face into the lake? And she looked at me and I said, let's jump together. And she goes, okay. And we got on it. It was awesome. I loved it. She loved it. She gets off and she races off this thing to her brothers and cousins who had not gotten on it and is just championing. Oh, that was so fun. And as a dad, I can tell you, right there, I was like, okay, I took a regret. I used it to motivate my daughter, and look at this moment she's having. Nice. Like she is the queen of the silver dollar today. Like she is the queen. So I think that's how it motivates us, right? Is we can take it, we learn from it, and then we make our choices maybe better in the future. And then what can organizations do? In the family business, look, we have regrets. I have things I wish I would not have said to my mother. I have things I wish I would not have said to my dad. I wish I would have been kinder and gentler to my brothers some of the time. And there are things in the business. I wish we would have made a land deal that we didn't make. I wish we would have bought water when we maybe could have bought it at a really low price. All those things. How do they help us as an organization? When we talk about them. And we say, okay, so next time, how do we better make choices? How do we better communicate? I had my brother, the financier in our business, he knows where every penny is. And he was driving me crazy a year ago with some detail. And I kind of snapped at him. And by the next day I was regretting it. And so because I'd thought about regret in a new way, instead of waiting and waiting 20 years, and then at his funeral while he's lying in the coffin saying, hey, by the way, I'm sorry I yelled at you that day. I just picked up the phone. I said, hey, you know what, Mike? I want you to know I appreciate you. And I was a jerk yesterday. I don't know why, but I was a jerk. Will you forgive me? And
Nice.
he goes, ah, you weren't that bad.
Nice.
Right.
Yes.
And so what I, and I could have saw, oh, he's going to be so mad. But instead, I just did it. And what did he do? He gave me grace.
Yeah.
So I think if we do that inside our families or organizations, we're not afraid to confront the hard stuff. We don't wallow in it. We grow from it, and we cut each other a little slack. A lot of good stuff can happen.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. I think that's an amazing, amazing point to end, unless you have anything to top that. But this has been a lovely conversation, Tom.
Well, I hope people will chase the thought a little bit and maybe read the book and share with each other, because I think in the community of agriculture, you know, the more we deepen our relationships, the more intimate we make our relationship with each other to be vulnerable. It's powerful stuff, and we can, as Daniel Pink says, right, we can look backward and it'll move us forward.
Ooh, amen. Okay, Tom, I'm wrapping up at that point. Thank you so much for having another beautiful conversation with us here in the audience. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks to everybody.
Wonderful. And you in the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, like it and share it, get it out there. Because like I just said, this is a conversation that every woman, every man is having out loud or in their head. And I would sure love for them to hear this and the wisdom that Tom shared. So thank you guys. See you on next week's episode. Bye-bye.